Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Jean Kwok is the author of The Leftover Woman, a novel. She's a repeat guest on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books and is a New York Times and internationally best-selling author of Searching for Sylvie Lee, Girl in Translation, and Mambo in Chinatown. Her work has been published in 20 countries and is taught in universities, colleges, and high schools around the world. She has been selected for numerous honors, including the American Library Association Alex Award, the Chinese American Librarians Association Best Book Award, and the Sunday Times EFG Short Story Award International Shortlist. She is fluent in Chinese, Dutch, and English. Thank you, Jean. I'm so happy to have you back on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss The Leftover Woman, a novel. So excited.
I am so thrilled and happy to see you again, Zibby. Oh my gosh.
Oh, and thank you so much for putting me in the acknowledgments. That was so sweet. Thank you.
Of course, because you are such a force in the publishing world, as is commonly acknowledged. And, as a member of your author board of Zibby Books, I have a kind of close-up view of, how much you really genuinely care about being innovative, about helping authors, about making sure that attention goes to the worthy, attention and resources. So we are all very grateful to you, Zibby.
Thank you. That was so sweet. Well, I told you this over Instagram, but as I was finishing the book, I got my first pedicure that I haven't gotten in an airport, and I can't in maybe a year or two, and only because my daughter was getting one and begged me to do it. Anyway, I was all the way close to the end, and I had to finish. And they were like, "Okay, you want to get up and go to the dryer?" And I was like, "No, I need to just sit here, please." And then 5 minutes later, they came back and they're like, "Would you like to get up?" And I'm like, "No, I have to keep reading." So I got so into it, and I didn't see it all coming, and I loved the way it, and the whole thing was great. It was really cool, really great.
I'm so excited to hear that, because that's of course what every author wants, that the reader is so sucked in that they're like, just leave me alone, let me finish, let me figure out what happened. And it's it's a challenge, especially since as this book is about two mothers, two worlds, and one impossible choice. And so it's really, really hard. It was hard for me to figure out how to have an ending that would not be too much one way or another, that, kind of emphasizes unity and motherly love, and is kind of unexpected, but yet earned. And so, that was what I was trying to do.
Wow. Maybe, yes, go into what the book is actually about for other people now that I've, gushed about it.
Okay, well, so the book is about a young woman in China who gives birth to a baby during the one-child policy. And she's told the baby dies shortly after birth. She grieves terribly. But a few years later, she finds out that the baby had not died, but had been given away for adoption by her no-good husband to a wealthy American couple for adoption. And when the book opens, Jasmine Yang is her name. Jasmine has followed her daughter to New York to get her baby back. And the book is told from two points of view, from that of Jasmine, the biological mother, and that of Rebecca Whitney, the wealthy adoptive mother who, desperately loves her daughter.
You have this whole subplot of Rebecca's attempt to acquire a manuscript by basically the Sandra Cisneros type author who has a new amazing book coming out, and you reveal a lot of, theoretically insider talk about what it's like being left out of an auction and what do you have to do to get on this author's good side, and her taking her to lunch. I mean, there was so much stuff about publishing, and you of course are a massive bestselling author. Talk about where that came from. Did you see all that stuff related to your own books? Just give me a little color on all of that.
Well, that was so fun to write, right? That was totally fun because Rebecca Whitney she comes from old money. I did not mean to suggest that people in publishing all live in penthouses and brownstones like Rebecca does. But, she is kind of the modern woman trying to have it all and trying, like all of us, to balance success and ambition and love for her family. And like so many of us, she is judged so harshly, right? It's kind of what, so much of what you do is about, Zibby. It's about how, we're kind of just killing ourselves trying to be everything to everyone. And somehow, the judgment that's laid upon us can be pretty devastating, and you never feel like you can do it all. You never feel like you have enough time or resources to give everybody all. And so Rebecca is indeed, top brass at a publishing house, and she goes through all of the struggles that, we do in publishing, with competing for a top manuscript and, dealing with having a limited budget and dealing with a fickle readership. And she gets embroiled in an industry scandal due to some mistakes that she's made, and her career is about to come toppling down. So yes, all of that is happening while this whole other story is going on with her child.
Yes. And you even, I won't give anything away, but just the trust that you have to develop, or that you need in order to have a successful relationship with your author, and how as an editor or a publisher, you have to have this sort of blind faith in whatever the author is telling you. But what if that leads you astray? You don't know.
No, that's right. That's right. And indeed, in the book, what happens, what we find out right away with Rebecca is that she trusted an author. The book took off. It was doing brilliantly, nominated for everything, hitting every list. And then she found out that the author had lied. And, that pulls down not only the author, but everybody associated with it, with the publishing house, her team, and, Rebecca's boss is like, you've got to fix this. Whatever you do, you have to fix it, which is why Rebecca is desperate to land this other author who she thinks, will give her the chops she needs to move her imprint forward. But it is, publishing is an incredibly competitive field for the authors, but also on the other side. I mean, about that, Zibby. What is your experience? What do you think about it?
Well, we're not. I don't know. We're not. I would never feel bad for being excluded from an auction. I feel like once books are going to go for we can't play in that space where books are going for $1 bazillion. That's just not where we are as a boutique publishing firm. But it's a bummer, to see a manuscript go and be like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a chance to read that. That sounds like something that would have been up my alley. So yes, you have that for sure. Tell me about the writing of this story, and even where you were in your own life as you wrote it.
Well, of course, as someone who has a full career, these are all issues that I deal with, right? So the Rebecca aspect of it, juggling family and life and a husband and kids, and while really trying to function in a very high-powered field, is a challenge that I understand greatly. I remember when the kids were, when I had my first baby and we took an international flight, and my husband changed the baby's diaper on the plane. And you should have heard the flight attendants. It was like the second coming. They're like, oh, it was so wonderful. I was just like, me, like I changed the diaper too, but nobody cares, right? Nobody cares. Anyway, so that was Rebecca's story, but then Jasmine's, of course, is very much based on my own upbringing as a Chinese girl in a very traditional family where women were not expected to grow up and go to college. I was very poor. We worked in a factory. I worked in a factory as a child in New York City, of all things. And there was no expectation of go to an Ivy League college. No, it was really work in the factory your whole life, or go and marry, if you're lucky, find some man willing to marry you. And then you can bear him sons and cook for him and clean for him. And so these were very important skills, which I utterly lacked in every way, Zibby. The worst, I still am, housekeeper, cook ever known to man. So, they despaired of me. And I looked at those two choices and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to Harvard. And, years later, that's actually what I wound up doing. But it was a long, hard road from, that rundown, unheated apartment in Brooklyn and the factory in Chinatown to an Ivy League school. But I was glad that I had that escape route, but I knew so many people who didn't. And the one child policy in China was devastating families, in so many different ways. And so I knew those daughters who had been left or abandoned or given for adoption, but I also knew people who had adopted those daughters. I knew their story and their love as well. And so I always knew that this was a book I needed to write.
Wow. My gosh. I know we talked about this with searching for Sylvie Lee and your background and just the unbelievable resilience and strength and drive that you had to go to not just an Ivy League school, So how did you back then, why, where did it come from that you're like, no, I'm going to go to Harvard? Where did that come from?
That's such an interesting question. I think that desperation can do a lot for you. And the lack of talent in, traditional womanly traits. So it was like, there was no way I was going to be able to take care of a man because I'm, opinionated and argumentative and also a daydreamer. I was one of those kids that was always staring out the window instead of doing the practical things I was supposed to be doing. So people sometimes ask, indeed, how was it that you managed to get to Harvard, believe me, I did not go to any kind of extra classes or coaching or, anything like that in terms of any tests or applications on that route. And what I always say is, I took it seriously. I knew that was my way out. And, Harvard, I set my sights on because it has a need blind admission policy. So I knew it was one of the schools that if I got in, they would arrange it so that I could go, no matter how little my family could pay. And it was also the only school my parents had ever heard of. So it was like, okay, so all right, that would increase the chances being allowed to go. But I was serious. And I think there's a real difference between being serious and knowing you don't really have a safety net and kind of like wanting something and thinking maybe I want to do it and maybe I don't and I don't know. Something I like to talk about is that I think that we have our short-term happiness, and believe me, I am easily seduced by chocolate and movies and, hanging out and lying on the couch instead of doing the things I need to do. But I have learned that there's long-term fulfillment that comes from actually being serious and taking the time and taking the effort to do something well. And somebody said this to me recently that I don't remember who, but it was very wise. And it was that how good you're going to be at something is measured by how much you can tolerate being bad at it. And what that means is that, if I want to learn to ice skate and I am terrible, but I can tolerate being terrible and I keep at it and I go on being terrible instead of being like, oh my God, I don't like this, I'm leaving. Because I wasn't great at school. I didn't speak any English. I almost flunked out. I was in the worst reading group. I remember wishing I could be with like the smart kids, and I wasn't. I think that if you can tolerate not being good, and sometimes you have to tolerate for a really long time, really long, you can become great. You can become great at it, because if you're serious and you have the passion, I think you can really do anything.
Wow, that was very inspirational. Thank you. That was great. Do you feel like you wanted, just back to the book for a minute, do you feel like you wanted Rebecca to be a likable character? Or did you want us to be questioning her and her personality? Did you want us, how did you want the reader to feel about Rebecca?
Well, I can tell you how I feel about Rebecca, which is that
let's do that. Yes.
Yes, I love Rebecca. I completely love Rebecca. I completely love Jasmine as well. And that was the difficulty, because this is an impossible situation with one child and two mothers. When you are the author of a book, you have to be willing to have your characters make terrible, terrible mistakes. And they both do. Both Jasmine and Rebecca make terrible choices. And there are ways in which Rebecca's vision is limited. And that's a part of actually the big plot twist in the book, that we see how limited her vision is in some ways, right? But she's doing her best. She's trying, and she is at heart a really good person who's doing her best. And so I have had readers who, camp Rebecca, camp Jasmine, they tend to go one way or another, or sometimes, they love them both or they hate them both. But I'm really squarely in both camps. I think that they're both wonderful women. And in the end, what I want the book to say is actually I want the book to emphasize unity over division. And that, the most important thing is what these two women have in common. And that is their absolute love for that girl and their willingness to sacrifice everything for the child.
Interesting. I love it. I also really loved Anthony and the childhood love sort of Jasmine back home, and how he was still wearing the bracelet when they got reunited. And oh my gosh, and just how you wove that relationship in all its forms throughout the book. And I don't know, I was kind of rooting for him too.
I'm glad. I love him too. Although he's also flawed.
Yes.
And I kind of love that first little cute meet at the beginning when Jasmine and Anthony run into each other again after all these years, because Anthony was indeed her childhood best friend, and they had never had a relationship of any sort. But she was married off very young to someone almost really for money, and so. They see each other, and he kind of stalks off because he's like, wow, you ditched me and you didn't care for me. And she's like, what are you, 2 years old? But then indeed she catches a glimpse of a bracelet that she had given to him when he was 14 years old, and he still got it on. So what does that mean?
Yeah. Oh, I loved that. All the times they would meet up and didn't know where it was going to go. And I don't know. I loved that element woven throughout as well. Which character came first for you when you were writing this? Jasmine or Rebecca?
It's funny. I think actually they both came pretty much at the same time. But what's interesting is that I wrote them both in first person. So in the original draft of the book, both Rebecca and Jasmine were written in first person. And then I felt I needed a little bit more distance from Rebecca. Also, that it'd be easier for the reader to differentiate the two voices and so on. And so then I moved Rebecca into close third point of view instead. It's funny because, I mean, Rebecca's white. I'm not. Jasmine's Chinese. I am Chinese, of course. But there were a lot of ways in which I had to really project myself into both characters. Like Rebecca's in the publishing world, which is my world, is a world I know really well. And, I love being in that world. I love the inner dirt of the world, all the gossip that we share about, oh my gosh, did you hear? Oh, what happened at the Frankfurt Book Fair this year? Who disappeared to a hotel room together? Yeah, that kind of dishiness is just so fun. So that part of Rebecca's life actually came very easily to me. And of course, Jasmine, I have a lot in common with Jasmine with the attitude towards women and feeling oppressed and feeling like you don't have a voice. And Jasmine finally finds her voice because she loves her child so much that she decides to take action and break from her life. But, Jasmine's whole life in rural China, I had to do a lot of research. I mean, interviewed a lot of people because I was born in Hong Kong, a big city in China, but I've never really lived in a rural village in China. And the book was written during the pandemic. There was no chance of me actually traveling there, which I like to do research. So, both characters were really fun to write, but also very challenging in their own ways.
Interesting. What are you working on now?
I do have a book due soon, and it is a murder set at Harvard.
Ooh.
So, yes. And I actually just spent the summer traveling to Cambridge and Harvard to, just go through everything, go through Widener, the libraries. I've been interviewing people I knew there, all about the Adams House swimming pool. I don't know if you know, but there's a swimming pool. It's not there anymore, but it was there when I was a student where people would swim nude and all kinds of things would happen in that swimming pool.
Wow.
So, yes.
Who knew?
So, who knew, right? Who could expect this kind of thing? That's my new book.
That sounds really
coming.
Good.
Not yet. The Leftover Women first.
Okay. Sorry.
In October. Yes. No.
Who have you been reading lately that you really like, or what stories or books have you, or even films, or just things that you've been obsessed with lately?
Oh my gosh, well, there have been so many wonderful books lately. And actually, I'm writing an article for you, Zibby, with a roundup of books. I'm going to get that to you.
Well, thank you.
The many ways in which Zibby has an influence on our literary life. No, but there are, there's so many great books out, of course, like Yellowface is the great, publishing dishy book that's out and everyone's reading right now. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I absolutely loved. I read that book and I just could not put it down. I love some books by Zibby Books, like Hedge.
Oh, thank you.
That came out earlier. That came out earlier this year by Jane Delury, and I think that is just such a beautifully written, kind of complex, but really fun to read book, where you have relationships, you have love, you have romance, but you also have a mystery. And sometimes, I think those are kind of the best types of books where you have all of this depth, but you still have this propulsive, plotted element to carry you through. I think that's a really beautiful book. And I'm actually Jane's author mentor, and I loved being in touch with her and talking to her about the process and what she was going through and all of that.
Oh my gosh. This is literally the first time someone's ever said that they have been reading a book published by me. Published by Zibby.
You just started, right? You just started. Yes.
It was very nice of you. Yes. And Jane is a beautiful writer. Absolutely beautiful. And Hedge was beautiful. So yay. Give aspiring authors some advice. What advice would you have? What should they do? What should they look out for? How do they become you?
Oh, well, I don't know if they want to be me, but I think that one thing that's always very hard for writers to think about is, when do I make changes and when don't I make changes, right? You get so much advice and you also get pressure to make changes to your book if your career goes to a certain place, right? We all start by writing for ourselves, but then if you want to make a career, you actually have to write for other people at the same time, right? So you have an agent, you have a publisher, everyone has an opinion. And, it's not true that we are always right. I think that we wish we were always right, but I have certainly benefited from advice, and that there's been many, many times when the fact that I listened to advice helped the book tremendously. But when do you listen and when are you going astray? And what I always say is that I think we write out of passion. We write, and that passion translates onto the page. Like in The Leftover Women, the passion of mine that's on that page is my own experience as a Chinese woman, and feeling like I wasn't heard and I wasn't seen, and that I wasn't allowed to be heard or seen. And that passion you have to keep alive. It's like a flame that's in your work. And advice, absolutely. Listen to advice if you feel like it's taking you closer to where you go. But it's better to have a creature that's maybe not typical, but is vivid and alive and visceral and raw, than to have a kind of corpse that is perfectly proportioned, but it's just lying dead on the page. And I think we know that, right, Zibby? When we read books, when you get a manuscript, you read it and you feel, oh, this is alive. This is passionate. This is something I can burn for, as opposed to something where you're like, yeah, it's got all the right, characteristics, but it doesn't do much for me.
Mm-hmm. If only there was a way to bottle that sauce when something just works, because it's hard to break down why, but it when it happens, right? You can, on both sides, reading, writing.
It's just like love, right? It's just like chemistry. You go on a date and, you've done all the research and they seem totally fine. And you've even done a Zoom and they look like the picture. And then you go on the date and you're like, whoa, somehow like, or yes, right? Sometimes you think, I don't really know, but you feel that chemistry and you think, oh, well, okay, well, actually, maybe, right? And it's indescribable, and it's very, very hard to predict.
I love that. Relationships with books being like chemistry when you're dating between people. That's really interesting. I like that a lot. Thank you. Jean, thank you for The Leftover Woman. Thank you for the propulsive, unputdownable read that I found just totally immersive. And I just love you and your story and your enthusiasm and your kindness. And I'm just so glad we've gotten to know each other between books and all of that. So,
well, I feel the same way, Zibby. And I want to thank you for being the incredible person that you are, personally and professionally, because, we've connected also on personal issues, and you have been so supportive and lovely in every single way, and for what you do for us and for books and for authors. So thank you, Zibby.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
This is so nice. Thank you.
This is so great. Yes.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.